ladies here. We have Janet, Kim, Larry, and Mia. Mia's going to do some color commentary tonight. What we're going to do this evening is we're going to talk about how you would set up and how we would set up a wine tasting so that you get the best opportunity to express the wine with all of your friends that are coming over the house. I have a list, and I'm going to just go through each one of them, and we're all just going to talk about each one of them as we go through it. So what you would do when you're typically putting together a tasting is you want to pair varietals that are the same varieties, either from the same wine region or from different wine regions, as long as they're produced the same way and they're made from the same varietal grape. You would typically pair those together. You try and stick with wines that are close or the same age. You don't really want to be pairing up wines that are in 10 years difference in age, because that would change the characteristic of the wine. And the last thing before I open it up is that you would have crackers, cheese, nuts, chocolate, things that would enhance the flavors a little bit and not really overpower them. You don't want to change too much. Right?
No, I think that's great.
And I think what Larry forgot to say, which was most important, is your glassware. Your glassware must be clean. It must be clean of any smells, anything. Like if you had glasses stored in your cupboard, you want to make sure they're clean and fresh, so there's no residual smell.
Right, and that's actually, Larry and Kim just told me a really interesting, funny, but not funny at the time, story about when that situation happened to them. They had rented glasses that weren't cleaned and stored properly, and unbeknownst to them, pouring in the beautiful Lorella wine, you go to take your first sip and you're smelling a musty, stale glass and not the wine. So I think absolutely checking to make sure that your stemware or lack of stemware is nice and fresh and clean and doesn't have any extra smell.
Yeah, I think the biggest simple mistake that's made often is you go over to your carryout cabinet where you've been storing all your good glassware, you pull it out, you get ready for your tasting, and you don't consider you should be washing all that stemware unless you have already done that recently, because sitting in that cabinet for a year or 2 years is going to have some smell that is not going to help the wine when you're doing the tasting.
Right, and I think with that being said, we were talking earlier also about making sure that the environment is as free of other fragrances as possible. So you would want to eliminate candles, scented candles, and I hate to say this, ladies, but maybe even perfume or aftershave for the gentlemen, because if we're all smelling your perfume, it's very hard to smell the wine. I know we all want to smell nice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there you
That
have
was
it.
Mia
Mia.
says no. I want
Mia agrees, no perfume.
She says
Right,
no
Mia?
perfume.
Okay, so another few tips is always have a dump bucket on the table for everyone to be able to dump wine into. Even if you're planning on drinking all the wine, keep in mind that not necessarily everyone's going to want to drink all of the volume that you're being poured each time.
Right, and I think also with that being said, it makes for a nice environment, because say you're doing a tasting with some couples, maybe someone doesn't want to drink quite so much, so they can maybe have a little taste, enjoy the conversation, and then dump the rest of their wine and get ready for the next glass where someone else might want to finish that. So everyone's very comfortable when you're including a dump bucket.
So another small tip is if you're going to be chilling your wines, don't over chill them. You want to be able to taste the wine for what they are. Probably a good rule of thumb is if you have all your wines, your whites, are in the refrigerator, take them out 20 minutes or a half hour before you're going to serve them, so they still have a slight chill, but they're not overly cold, because at that point you're not going to smell as much in the wine as you would normally smell. Okay. Take newspaper, paper bags, similar paper bags, number the bags, and cover all the wines. Take off any of the capsule coverings that are on those wines so that you can't identify the bottle even though they're inside the bag. Man, the worst thing you could do is we're trying to make it so that when you're tasting these wines, you have no idea where the wines are from, and picking which one you like the best.
Right, and that is actually great because when you don't know where the wine is from, you are giving your true, honest opinion. I was at a tasting once where we were tasting very expensive, high-end Opus One, next to just a very simple California Red. We had no idea that one was Opus One. And it was interesting because we were really able to analyze the wines fairly without any preconceived notion of, oh, everyone says this is great, it must be great.
Right.
So I love your idea of the brown bag and removing the capsules because they're your own experience.
It's a fair playing field.
Exactly.
Well, so another thing from that, another thing to make sure when you're pairing up wines, you can, when you're buying the wines at the store, you can buy wines that are, we talked about the same varietal, we talked about same region, different region, but you can also play around with the price point. You can buy a wine that's expensive, buy a wine that's not as expensive or somewhere in the middle, but making sure they're all from the same varietal. And then when you're tasting those wines, you're gonna actually be able to tell, you know, at least a starting point. You want the tasters to start from a point that is at least playing field, the same playing field. So starting with the same variety is a good way to do that. And also, I was talking about this idea of production. You want to make sure that the wines that you're pairing are produced similarly. Like you don't want to pair an unoaked Chardonnay with an oak Chardonnay. You want to have those, they're similarly made. Also, it makes it easier for you to taste those side by side.
Exactly.
Okay, another thing that's important, and this one goes towards drinking too much, unfortunately, is there is no rule of thumb that says you have to. Mia, is there anything you want to say? Mia?
You want to make a comment, Mia?
Mia, you want to make a comment,
She's
honey?
surfing right now.
She's surfing. There is no recommended number of tastings that you do, but there is a limit at which at some point you're drinking too much. We like to stick with probably no more than 6 bottles of wine side by side, but that's up to you. You could do as many as you want or as few as you want. Tonight, later on, we're going to do some tastings. It'll do pairing up 2 different wines of 2 different places side by side. Make sure that you bring paper and pencil to each taster at their table so they get a chance to actually write notes down about each one of the wines.
Right,
yeah.
well, and when we talk about making notes, one of the easy ways to make notes is when you look at the wine, just start your sentence with "this wine is," and I think that helps your mind finish the sentence. So this wine is clear and bright. This wine has characteristics of grapefruit and lemongrass. This wine is a Sauvignon Blanc. So I think that if you start by saying this wine is, it helps you talk the wine language. And then that makes it fun. Then everyone can be a cork dork like we are.
Yeah.
And this is probably a good time to talk about why we do the tastings and how it's to make it approachable for you. Most people have not done wine tastings, or you've just started doing wine tastings. And it's you typically a person that when you first start tasting wine in a wine tasting, you're a little shy to comment on what you think the wine tastes like or what the characteristics are. And that's okay. It's important to do the tasting so you learn more and more about the wine, so you're memorizing the flavors, the character, the look, everything about that wine, so that you become more knowledgeable as you do more tastings.
Right. And I loved your analogy about the lilac bush.
bushes.
You
Right.
should share that because I think that that makes perfect sense because wine is so mysterious. People are a little nervous about how to understand it.
Right.
And I think that that made so much sense.
So what you're trying to do,
Larry, I love your analogy that you were talking earlier about the lilac bush because that made so much sense. I was like, oh, that just makes sense. Wine can be a little intimidating as far as learning it, so share that story with us.
Sure. So when you're doing wine tasting, the main thing you're trying to do is train your mind into the different smells so you can describe them, write them down on a piece of paper from what you smell. And an easy way to remember it is, in the springtime when lilac bushes come out, you're driving down the road and you smell a lilac bush. Your mind has already memorized what the smell of the lilac bush is. You don't need to see the lilac bush to know that's what you smell. That's what you're trying to do to your brain when it comes to wine, to remember the flavors and the notes and everything about that wine, so you can transfer that information onto paper or verbalize it so people understand what that wine would normally taste like.
That's a great
It's a wrap.
analogy.
It's
Yeah,
a wrap.
so in closing, thank you for coming to listening to our tips and tricks and tips. And be brave, go to the store, buy some wine,
Maybe
buy some Lorella wine, and have your friends over the house and do a tasting. Right, Mia?
Salute.
Say goodbye.